Hello, everyone, I'm Parker, and we continue to brainstorm widely. For many people, the transition from junior high school to high school is also a turning point in life, because some students after graduating from junior high school no longer continue their high school education. Some attend vocational schools while others enter the workforce. Certainly some who are not of legal age can only work within their own family or privately owned businesses at home, performing various tasks. Of course, in many impoverished regions and countries, many people do not continue their education after completing primary school. However, this situation is relatively uncommon and specific. It is not the majority case, because regardless of how impoverished an area may be, education is still necessary in the current relatively developed contemporary society. Many countries offer free compulsory education, so this transition from junior high school to high school becomes a crucial phase. Many students either discontinue their education or directly enter the workforce. We will discuss these issues further in the specific explanations that follow. This lecture is specifically about the mindset of students when they reach high school. We will discuss the changes in this situation from three perspectives: students, parents and schools, because during this period students still have more contact with their families and schools. First, let's take a look at the changes in the students themselves. By the time they reach high school, students have all grown up, and these children are also approaching adulthood, with some already being adults as they grow older, both physically and psychologically. Including physiologically, they are nearing maturity, so there are significant changes during this period. For example, some students who may not have performed particularly well in middle school have just entered high school, but this transition can bring about changes. After all, they are approaching maturity, so their thinking, ideas are more are all approaching maturity. After most students enter high school, their goal is still to go to college or pursue further education. However, in the initial stages their performance may not be outstanding. During this period, as they transition to high school, they enter a new environment and their maturity plays a role as well. Therefore, whether their transformation during this period can be effectively utilized depends on parents and the school. However, speaking from the students' perspective, firstly, in terms of their studies, they have entered a higher level, which also means that the academic pressure on them is quite significant. Especially after entering high school, they will face the college entrance examination, commonly known as the GAOKO, in 3 years. Therefore, various pressures from school, society and different aspects are weighing on their shoulders. Moreover, during this period students are indeed under a lot of academic pressure, and they often find themselves in a difficult situation. However, they have no choice but to continue on this path as schools push them forward. So many of them are in a passive state when it comes to their studies and struggle to achieve proactive learning goals. When it comes to the issue of learning, students from all countries and regions are in a similar situation. They struggle to achieve a proactive learning state. Even some students who want to take the initiative to learn, whether due to family reasons or other factors, often can't find effective learning methods. Although some students are very intelligent, study diligently and perform well in exams at school, they may still be in a passive learning state. The reason is quite simple: it's a matter of their mindset and approach to learning. The level of abstract thinking ability among students who have entered high school can vary, but the differences may not be too significant. Many people use abstract thinking ability as a criterion to distinguish between good and poor students, but I believe that this is not realistic. This is because many students who do not perform well academically do not necessarily have poor abstract thinking abilities. Instead, they may simply not know how to apply this ability effectively, which is why they may struggle academically. The key issue here is indeed a matter of their thinking patterns and approaches to learning. I understand your perspective, and what you're emphasizing is indeed a serious and important issue. Having a good thinking pattern during this period is crucial, and even if someone possesses excellent abstract thinking ability, it may go to waste if they don't know how to effectively apply it. In that sense, having a strong thinking pattern is just as important as having the ability itself. Your point is valid and highlights the significance of not only having cognitive abilities but also knowing how to use them effectively. So what's important during this period is whether the thinking patterns they develop during middle school are good or bad. It's indeed a complex matter, as each person's thinking patterns are unique. Some students may have correct thinking patterns but might not fully understand the underlying principles. They may know the what but not the why. This is a common characteristic among students worldwide after entering high school. This issue became particularly prominent, so when it comes to their studies, students face significant pressure as they are often required to follow the school's or teachers' prescribed curriculum and learn in a step by passive manner. This is the fundamental reason for the high levels of stress they experience. If there is a good thinking pattern in place, students will take the initiative to learn, and this situation is fundamentally different from passive learning. Moreover, the outcomes achieved are also different, so our emphasis here on the importance of thinking patterns is to highlight this specific manifestation. Certainly when students enter high school, they naturally experience physical and psychological maturation. Some external behaviors may decrease while others may increase, and this varies depending on individual differences. The external behaviors exhibited during this time, as well as exposure to certain negative aspects of society, are influenced by several factors. One factor is that these behaviors and even certain image-related requirements are often aimed at attracting the attention of the opposite sex. During this stage, they have reached a level of physiological maturity where many of them experience a strong attraction to the opposite sex and a desire to form relationships. During this period, it can indeed be quite challenging for students. It's difficult to suppress these natural inclinations because they are becoming more independent and they can avoid parental control by the time they reach high school. To be frank, many parents may feel somewhat helpless in dealing with them. You can't physically discipline them anymore because they are older, and they may even resist such attempts. Trying to reason with them can also be challenging because they have already developed their habitual thinking patterns. As a result, most students tend to follow their inclinations during this time. When I mentioned following their inclinations, I didn't mean that they are not studying, but rather that they can be quite self-centered. They tend to prioritize their thoughts and don't consider the perspectives, opposition, or opinions of others. This behavior often continues from middle school. They may not care about how others view them and may not even think about it. Of course, such an attitude can lead to constraints from various sources, including school, society, and family. Students have various ways to evade these constraints, and they can come up with different reasons to do so. As parents and schools, to be frank, there may not always be effective ways to forcefully suppress some of their behaviors during this period, so being a high school student during this time can indeed be quite challenging. During this period, some students may transform. For example, students who may not have performed well academically or were mischievous in middle school might seek to change themselves. They may want to improve their academic performance, attract the attention of their opposite sex classmates, or achieve other personal goals. In such cases, they can make efforts to study and learn new things diligently. So this high school period, it's also a significant transformation phase in their lives, and this transformation, to be blunt, directly impacts their future. The reason why I emphasize the importance of thinking patterns here is primarily to guide them onto the right path during this transformative period. This is the key role of both schools and parents during this period. Another characteristic of students is their strong desire to assert themselves. Their goal in doing so isn't limited to attracting the attention of the opposite sex. They often exhibit a self-centered attitude, sometimes to an extreme degree. In high school, to be blunt, some of these students may display a sense of superiority and look down on others. So during this period, many students may exhibit a state of disrespect towards their parents, their family, and various other aspects, as they believe they are always right. What's even more important is that they develop an idealized and somewhat elusive mindset during this period. This idealized mindset often arises in response to societal trends, leading them to believe that they are trendsetters of their era. They might feel that others can't keep up with the trends, don't understand them, and are ignorant of their perspective. They believe that their thoughts and actions are correct. They may even view activities like partying, dancing, drinking, and engaging in chaotic gatherings as something very right or trendy. Therefore, during this period, their behavior can be quite challenging for parents or adults to understand. It can be perplexing because they may appear childish and ignorant in their expressions, yet they are incredibly confident. This period is when psychological differences, especially in terms of confidence and attitude, become particularly noticeable during this period. As parents, you don't need to expect that your children will understand or comprehend you completely, and vice versa. Young people have thoughts and ideas that don't always follow specific patterns or rules. They think and act according to their desires. The seemingly childish things they do may be viewed by them as very right, good, and trendy. They may not always have a clear understanding of their place in the world. It's not that they don't understand when you explain things to them. They often do understand but choose not to act accordingly. During this period, another aspect of their behavior is the peak of rebellious and defiant tendencies. They can exhibit complete rebellion, and what's even more challenging is that during this time these youngsters have their thoughts and consider this rebellion to be right and noble, something that others can't comprehend. This is when the term generation gap becomes apparent, signifying the divide between two generations. Is it a generation gap? To be frank, many sociologists and educators have introduced terminology and descriptions of phenomena that often encourage irrational and immature behavior. Why do I say this? Well, you might argue that times are progressing and society is evolving, which is true. Each era is different, but what is a generation gap? It's essentially a difference in thinking, right? Because as times progress, why should you discard past thoughts and traditions if you understand it this way? To be blunt, it's not a generation gap issue, but rather a downhill trend. Those children are not experiencing a generation gap with adults. It's a decline in their thinking, a phase of being unreasonable and difficult. If you look closely, you'll see that not all rebellious children have valid reasons for their actions. Very few do. The vast majority are in the wrong even when they are doing something incorrect. Why should we use certain terms or concepts to cover up their behavior? Does it make sense? So in matters of education, I believe that many times we should stick to our principles. Some children can behave recklessly, and perhaps due to parental opposition or family issues they may not openly express their conflicts. During this period they might avoid you, and you may feel helpless in dealing with their behavior. This is how they behave because they feel like they don't belong anywhere, as they believe everything they do is right, making it difficult for you to intervene effectively during this period. All these psychological manifestations and behaviors are different from middle school. In middle school they might still have some fear of their families, but once they enter high school that fear often diminishes. How do you approach their education in such a situation? Sometimes many adults, so-called, not understand them and don't need to understand them because they are fundamentally wrong. So what I want to emphasize today is that their mindset and behavior are often influenced by the tolerance of their families and society. I don't know if everyone agrees with what I'm saying, but if all of our society and families do not tolerate any of these behaviors, these incorrect behaviors and thoughts, and this kind of unruly behavior, then where else can they go, and how can they continue to be so defiant during this period? It's not necessarily about suppressing but their behavior can indeed be quite defiant. As you put it, this behavior often arises because they feel uncertain about their future. They may work hard in their studies and aim for college for two main reasons: to uphold their family's reputation and their own, and to attract the attention of the opposite sex. They often don't have other thoughts or ambitions, at least in the case of most individuals. When you ask them what kind of job they truly want in the future, what specific things they want to do, or what kind of person they want to become, they often don't have clear ideas. During this period their lack of direction in this regard, to be frank, can be quite concerning. Why do I say this? Because many individuals during this period have chaotic thoughts, let alone a clear thinking pattern. Some people work hard and get into college, while others may seem to be going through life aimlessly. However, those who develop a jumping mindset can face difficulties in their future careers. What is meant by jumping mindset is that their thoughts leap from one thing to another in an instant and then swiftly transition to yet another. Their thinking jumps around without forming a coherent structure. I've interacted with many young people like this. If you ask them to do something, their minds are racing with numerous ideas. In a 5-minute conversation they might come up with 18 different thoughts like this. This can be quite concerning because it's hard to focus when their minds are constantly filled with random thoughts. The reason for all of these behaviors is indeed chaotic thinking, and not only is their thinking chaotic, but there's also a lack of a structured thinking pattern. If they develop such a thinking pattern during this period, that's the most alarming aspect I want to emphasize. Physiologically, during this period they have matured and they become consciously interested in forming relationships with the opposite sex and engaging in various activities. How should we understand this phenomenon? Of course, as a society, as schools, and as parents, we may not fully understand it, and we might resort to saying things like "you're not allowed to do this" or that. However, how many of them will listen? Many will engage in activities behind your back, and they can be quite secretive about it. So during this period, to be honest, because they are reaching physical maturity, they naturally have physiological needs. As adults we should understand this. Many of their behaviors during this time revolve around attracting the opposite sex, and to be frank, this applies to both boys and girls. There is an opinion that early romantic relationships, early maturity in boys, or even issues like female vanity or seduction play a role in these phenomena. I don't think it's absolute, because to understand these phenomena we should first analyze them from a physiological perspective. They have reached physical maturity and their bodies have developed accordingly. The attraction to the opposite sex is a normal physiological phenomenon. If we insist on demonizing this, it won't serve any meaningful purpose. So during this stage students exhibit these behaviors, but you cannot force a high school student to act or think in a certain way. As we all know, thinking and actions go hand in hand. Without the thought, how can they engage in that behavior? So to turn it around, how can we change their thinking? Many people, including parents and schools, tend to focus on limiting students' behavior while neglecting their thoughts. For a student, the most crucial aspect is to change their mindset rather than forcing their behavior. But how do you change their mindset? This requires having a good thinking pattern. If you don't have a good thinking pattern, how can you make them realize that their thoughts are wrong? Furthermore, regardless of whether their thoughts are right or wrong, they ultimately need a thinking pattern to assist and refine their thoughts. However, if this thinking pattern is not a good one and is based on inertia, then it's a matter of personal judgment, and everyone knows what can happen. All adults understand this principle. This discussion concludes here for now.
Friends who are interested in my lectures, please click to subscribe and click on the little bell. At the same time, the links to the Big Tree Thinking Model Theory ebook and the Big Tree Thinking Model and Junior High School Mathematics lectures are here below. Friends can click on the link to watch related free lectures. Thank you all.